Gildan Media presents Your Coach in a Box, affordable, life-changing audio programs.
The first 20 minutes. Surprising science reveals how we can exercise better, train smarter, live longer. Written by Gretchen Reynolds. Read by Saltus. To Russell and Max, my training partners for life. A body in motion remains in motion unless acted upon by an external force. A body at rest remains at rest. Newton's first law of motion. Eating alone will not keep a man well. He must also take exercise. Hippocrates. Introduction. A body in motion. It's become a truism to say that humankind was born to run, and perhaps some politicians were, though what proper and odd little children they must have been. For the rest of us, the notion is debatable. Consider the latest evidence. Not long ago, biologists from the University of Utah, together with zoologists from Friedrich Schiller University Jena in Germany, and other researchers, set out to study how humans move and how divergent our locomotion is from that of, say, cheetahs or gazelles, who run so fluidly. The researchers fitted volunteers, most of them trained athletes in their 20s, 30s, or 40s, with face masks that measured how much oxygen they were breathing, and then had them alternately walk or run on treadmills. Each of the volunteers was asked to run and to walk in 3 different ways: by landing either on their heels, on the middle of their feet, or on their toes. Some research in the past few years has suggested that humans run most efficiently, meaning with the least consumption of oxygen, when they land on the balls of their feet or on their toes. Efficiency in human movement is desirable, as it is in other forms of transport, because it means that you burn less fuel over a given distance. Like a fuel-efficient car, a more efficient human machine needs less energy to cover the same number of miles as an inefficient one. Fuel savings matters during evolution. Being able to amble long distances on less food than the next Homo sapiens could mean that you'd complete a long stalking hunt and still have the wherewithal to undertake carnal relations later and pass your DNA on to the next generation. Part of the thinking behind the idea that humans are born to run is that running, particularly if you land on your toes, should be an efficient stride, and that, employing it, we would have run easily for hours, chasing down our prey. But in this study, running was not the most efficient human stride, not by a long shot. It didn't matter whether a runner landed on his toes, the balls of his feet, or his heels. Running just wasn't fuel efficient, the data showed. Walking was. By a sizable margin, walking, especially when the athletes landed first with their heels, was the most physically economical way for human beings to move. This estranges us from much of the animal world. Gazelles rarely walk and don't do it well. They bound madly, landing on their toes, but humans seem built to plod. We are remarkably economical walkers, the authors concluded. We are not efficient runners. We consume more energy to run than the typical mammal our size. Conveniently, as it turns out, caveman-like hunts were probably conducted at a walking speed anyway. When researchers recently followed a group of modern-day African hunters on a long, slow pursuit of their prey, the average speed was 3.8 miles per hour, a walking pace. This notion that all humans were born to run is unscientific, says zoologist Karen Studel, Ph.D., of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's conducted a number of comparative studies of the evolution of human and animal locomotion. The evolutionary record makes it clear that humans are born to be active, she adds. Sitting in one place wasn't an effective survival strategy when big cats and mammoths were around and food was mobile. That's all we know for sure at the moment, she continues, but ideas can change with new discoveries. Check back in a month. This is a book about your body in motion. It's also a book about change, because what we are learning today about the moving body is itself a flying target. Exercise science has never been so yeasty. Every week brings a new discovery that undercuts another entrenched and often beloved exercise practice. Who once would have believed that massage would turn out not to help tired muscles to recover? Or that chocolate milk would? For years, we were told it was impossible to drink too much water during a marathon, but overdrinking, it's been proven, can kill. The litany goes on. Stretching is probably bad for your muscles, but running is good for your knees. Weight training makes you smart. Lucky underpants really work. Your genes might be the reason you're so reluctant to work out in the first place. And humans are born to stroll. It's a fascinating time to own a body, and a perplexing one. But really, we shouldn't be surprised that our understanding of the moving body is in flux. The body is an astonishingly complicated contraption. The machinations required just to lift your finger are boggling. Muscles interlace with nerves, tendons, ligaments, and bones. Collagen stretches against sarcomeres. Cartilage softens the rubbing of bones. The brain, initiating movement, is flooded with spidery feedback from muscles, eyes, skin, various of its own lobes, and other systems. Fluids move in and out of cells. Biochemical processes flare. The liver gets drawn in. For many years, the specifics of this process were baffling. Scientists simply didn't have the tools to determine some aspects of how the exercising body worked. Organs or bodily systems were inaccessible or inconvenient for study purposes. But now, with the rapid advancements in microscopy, neurology, radiology, surgery, 3D biochemical imaging, and other fields, we can see into and measure the human body as never before. Consider what we've learned just about the brain in recent years. Sitting behind a dense, bony protective skull, it didn't, with standard imaging equipment, seem to be doing much, no matter how hard someone was thinking or how elaborately he was moving. But with the advent of functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI machines, scientists can view, from outside, the brain's operations. Which portions are firing with electrical impulses during movement, and which portions are remodeled by movement. Because, make no mistake, as the latest science absolutely assures us, no part of your body is static. If you move enough, your muscles change and grow. So does your mind. The brain initiates movement, but it is, in its turn, remade by movement. New cells are born, new vessels sprout. The same process operates body-wide. No cell in your body is unaffected by motion. Your very DNA is changed. So, move. The state-of-the-art exercise science also points out, with increasing urgency, that inactivity is, for the human body, unnatural and unwise. Death rates rise when societies sit. Waistlines grow. Unhappiness spreads. By one recent calculation, life expectancy in the United States and Europe will drop in the coming decade, for the first time in modern history, in large part because people do not exercise enough, but also because we smoke and overeat. So if this book is partly an overview of what's known right now about physical performance, it's also, and perhaps even more accurately, a user's manual. I hope it will allow you to take what's being learned about the human body and put it into action, whether your aim is to break 3:30 in a marathon or to walk more briskly around the block. We all have questions about exercise, whether we've been working out for years or hope to start tomorrow. Do you have to follow a specific diet? Can you get fit with only a few minutes of exercise on any given day? What is an interval? Science is, with exhausting regularity, supplying new, tested, evidence-based answers to these and hundreds of other questions. We don't, after all, have to be athletes to want to know how best to move. We need only to listen to the voice bred deep into our blood and bones that says, "Hey, let's go for a walk. The antelope herds are moving." You can ignore that last part. The body wants to move. Go with it. Chapter 1. The First 20 Minutes. Do you have many aches and pains? Is your mood generally good? How much time do you spend jogging? Do you ever visit the gym? Periodically, the good folks at the Division of Adult and Community Health at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta check in with Americans to see how they're feeling about their health. Asking them such questions is part of the ambitious and sweeping telephone poll known as the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System, or more familiarly, the BRFSS. Gesundheit. This survey asks Americans about their physical activities, including whether they engage in any exercise, and about how they subjectively feel about their health-related quality of life. After the raw data from one of the recent BRFSSs became available, CDC researchers decided for the first time to cross-correlate the information about, on the one hand, people's activity levels, and, on the other, their health-related quality of life, on a monthly basis. The researchers had anticipated, as they wrote in their published report, that physical activity would be associated with increasing benefits to health, both physiological and emotional. Although, as they also recognized, the dose-response relationships between physical activity and many health benefits remains unclear. In other words, the researchers felt confident that exercise was good for you, but they weren't quite sure how much was necessary to receive benefits. Their report, published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise, the official journal of the American College of Sports Medicine, somehow managed to muddy the issue further. They found that of the 175,850 adults whose health information was parsed, 18% engaged in effectively zero planned physical activity, that is, exercise, while 66% completed at least 30 minutes a day of moderate physical activity, such as walking or easy bicycling. And 42% said they exercised vigorously, jogging, for instance, at least once or twice a week for 20 minutes or more. Many in this group were also moderate exercisers on other days. These are more impressive numbers in terms of activity than in many recent studies of Americans. In those, particularly when the studies relied on hard measurements, such as pedometers, to gauge activity, the percentage of Americans who were even moderately active on most days of the week barely reached 50%. The more eye-opening BRFSS data, though, came from people's estimates of their health-related quality of life in the month preceding the survey. People who exercised moderately reported fewer unhealthy days, during which they felt fatigued, unhappy, ill, anxious, achy, or otherwise off, than people who didn't exercise. Almost 30% of the sedentary respondents, in fact, said they'd felt puny on at least 14 days in the prior month. Far more surprising, though, was that more than 20% of the people who said they worked out vigorously multiple times during the week also reported 14 or more unhealthy days in the month. Specifically, since this was a study overseen by health statisticians, the scientists wrote that a poor HRQOL, health-related quality of life, was always more likely among those with no physical activity, usually more likely among those who had daily, 7 days a week activity, almost always and more likely for those with activity of short duration, less than 20 minutes a day, and more likely more than half the time for those with very long duration, more than 90 minutes a day. Or, to be blunt, the issue of just how much exercise people need and how much may be either too little or too much is, from a scientific standpoint, a big fat mess. Not stepping up. There was a time when the question of how much exercise a person required was moot. The cows needed seeing to. The corn needed tending. As we all know, prior to World War II, most Americans lived outside cities and were active almost all the time, whether they wished to be or not. A recent study of activity levels among a group of modern Old Order Amish families, whose lifestyles are considered representative of a past America, apart from the boomers, found that Amish men spent more than 10 hours a week in vigorous activity, on top of almost 43 hours a week of moderate activity and 12 hours a week of walking. They averaged almost 18,500 steps per day, or about 9 miles of walking every day of the week except Sunday. The Amish women were relatively slothful, covering only about 7.5 miles per day on average. By comparison, according to 2010 statistics, most American adults take about 5,000 steps a day, which pales in comparison not only with the Amish, but also with activity levels in other countries. The happy-go-lucky Australians average about 9,700 steps a day, the highest total in the Western world. The Swiss, number 2, yodel through 9,650 steps a day, and, despite the ready availability of Lindt chocolate, have a national obesity rate of barely 8%. In America, that rate is 34% and rising. But while those figures make it clear that most Americans don't move enough, they don't tell us how much each of us should be moving, because, frankly, no one really knows. Science and common sense tell us that, without a doubt, it's unhealthy to sit and be sedentary all day, says William Haskell, Ph.D., an emeritus professor of exercise physiology at Stanford University, and one of the country's experts in exercise dosing and longevity. But precisely how much exercise is required for health, fitness, or athletic performance is difficult to determine. Health, fitness, and athletic performance are, after all, distinct aims with distinct demands, and each of us must resolve, for ourselves, which we're trying to achieve. We also must decide how much we're willing to do, realistically, to reach those standards. Health may seem the most achievable goal, but in reality, health is a slippery term, defined often by its absence. Having high blood pressure, rotten cholesterol numbers, too much blood sugar, a wide waist, or actual illnesses from colds to cancer is unhealthy. Not experiencing those same conditions is good health. Activity can, if chosen wisely, improve health. Fitness is something else, although health and fitness are often automatically joined together. If you ask an exercise physiologist, fitness refers to cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory fitness. The two terms are almost but not quite synonymous. Cardiorespiratory includes measures of lung function, but close enough. Physical fitness in this sense is a measure of how efficiently you transport oxygen to laboring muscles and maintain movement. A physically fit person has strong lungs, a robust heart, and sturdy muscles. She may or may not be clinically healthy. Some people blessed with high marks on fitness can have miserable cholesterol profiles or rotund waistlines. A surprisingly large portion of any given person's biological fitness is, in fact, innate. According to several large recent studies, 30% or more of a person's cardiovascular fitness may be genetic. You are born either more or less physically fit than the next person. But how you augment or diminish that inheritance is up to you. Finally, there's athletic performance, an ambition unto itself, capable, in some instances, of mitigating the other two. Walking 3 miles a day on a regular basis will almost certainly improve most people's health and fitness. Running 4 marathons in a year might not. Unless it does. There is considerable variability in people's responses to exercise at any dose, Dr. Haskell says. Which raises the most central and pressing question in this entire book. Yes, fine, all those studies are very interesting, but what about me? How low can you go? Recently, researchers in Scotland trawled through a vast database of survey data about the health and habits of men and women in that fair land, similar to the BRFSS survey here. In this case, the scientists were looking to see how much exercise was needed to keep the average Scotsman or woman from feeling dour, or in technical terms, experiencing psychological distress. Scots are not famed for being blithe-hearted, and many of us might have expected that firm measures and lots of sweat would be required. But as it turned out, researchers found that a mere 20 minutes a week, of any physical activity, whether vigorous or easy, improved the respondents' dispositions. The activities in question ranged from organized sports to walking, gardening, and even house cleaning, the last not usually associated with bliss. The researchers found that, in general, more activity did confer more mental health benefits, and that participation in vigorous sports activities tended to be the most beneficial for mental health. But overall, their conclusion was that being active for as little as 20 minutes a week was sufficient if your specific goal happened to be a sanguine temper. The question of just how little activity people can get away with has preoccupied exercise scientists in recent years, in part because so many of us have proven so resistant to any exercise. There was a time in the 1970s and 1980s when most exercise guidelines, including those from the American College of Sports Medicine, ACSM, and other groups, aimed at athleticism. They recommended that people engage in prolonged, uninterrupted, vigorous activity for an hour or more, multiple times a week. Basically, people should run, swim, or bicycle, the recommendations suggested, and they should do so hard, and the more, the better. Some people responded. That was the height of the 1970s running boom. Then, in 1984, Jim Fixx, the author of The Complete Book of Running, died at age 52 of a fulminant heart attack while marathon training. Running didn't kill him. He'd been afflicted, an autopsy showed, with intractable heart disease, probably congenital. But some people gleefully and ghoulishly pointed to his death as a reason to remain couchbound. Even more Americans, though, hadn't needed such an excuse. They had not been inspired to exercise in the first place, at least not hard, and resolutely continued not to. By the 1990s, formal exercise recommendations, bowing to human nature, had softened, and experts were suggesting that less vigorous exercise might be sufficient. In 1995, the ACSM and the CDC jointly announced that every U.S. adult should accumulate 30 minutes or more of moderate-intensity physical activity on most, preferably all, days of the week. But there still was little science behind any exercise guidelines, including that one. So in the mid-2000s, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services convened an advisory committee of scientists, including physiologists, cardiologists, epidemiologists, nutritionists, and others, and asked them to scrutinize decades of studies about the benefits and risks of exercise, and to formulate new evidence-based guidelines. The result was the massive 2008 Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, which began on a cautionary note. The amount of physical activity necessary to produce health benefits cannot yet be identified with a high degree of precision, the authors wrote. Oh, great. But still, the scientists had persevered, wading through studies involving animals and humans, looking at the impacts that various types and amounts of activity have on people's risks for heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer, depression, and premature death in general. In some studies cited in the final report, exercise conferred little, if any, disease-fighting benefits. In others, the benefits kicked in only if the exercise was quite strenuous. In still others, a gentle stroll a few times a week was enough to lessen the risk of many diseases and early death. Despite the inconsistent results, the advisory committee ultimately reached a consensus about just how much and how little exercise most of us should be getting, at least for health purposes. The magic number, the report announced, was a minimum of 500 MET minutes of exercise a week. So, get to it. Of course, unless you're an exercise scientist, you probably don't know what a met minute is. A single met, or metabolic equivalent of task, is the amount of energy a person uses at rest. 2 mets represent twice the energy burned at rest. 4 mets, 4 times the energy used at rest, and so on. Walking at 3 miles per hour is a 3.3 met activity, while running at 6 miles per hour is a 10 met activity. The committee concluded that a person needs to accumulate a weekly minimum of 500 met minutes of exercise, which does not mean 500 minutes of exercise. Instead, 150 minutes a week, 2.5 hours, of a moderate 3 to 5 met activity, such as walking, works out to be about 500 met minutes. Half as much time, an hour and 15 minutes per week, spent on a 6+ met activity, such as easy jogging, seems, according to the committee, to have similar health effects. What this means, in practical terms, is that according to the best available science, you should walk or otherwise work out lightly for 150 minutes a week in order to improve your health. This report and other, newer science show that you can split these 150 minutes into almost any chunks and still benefit. In a nifty study of aerospace engineers, virgin exercisers one and all, the men were assigned to briskly walk or gently jog for 30 minutes a day in either a single, uninterrupted half-hour bout or in 3 10-minute sessions spread throughout the day, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at lunchtime, and 10 minutes in the evening. At the end of 8 weeks, both groups of engineers had improved their health and fitness profiles without major differences between the groups. All had wound up with lower heart rates, better endurance on a treadmill test, and a few less pounds. So, too, when separate groups of lab rats recently were allowed either leisurely to rodent paddle in a laboratory water feature for 3 hours, or were required to increase the tempo until they were swimming quite vigorously for 45 minutes. The animals afterward uniformly displayed significant improvements in their body's ability to regulate blood sugar, a key measure of health. It hadn't mattered how they'd accumulated the exercise, only that they had. The overload principle. There is a catch. The person who is likely to benefit the most from increasing exercise time is probably not you, but instead your pudgy Uncle Clarence or that pasty kid next door who's never met an online orc he couldn't slay. The greatest health benefit from exercise comes from getting up off the couch, says exercise physiologist Timothy Church, Ph.D., a professor at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who has studied exercise dosing extensively. Everything after that is incremental. The health benefits of activity follow, in fact, a breathtakingly steep curve at first. Almost all of the mortality reductions are due to the first 20 minutes of exercise, says Frank Booth, Ph.D., a professor of biomedical sciences at the University of Missouri and a much-cited expert on exercise and health. There's a huge drop in mortality rates among people who haven't been doing any activity and then begin doing some, even if the amount of exercise is quite small. In a recent meta-analysis of studies about exercise and mortality conducted by scientists at the University of Cambridge in England and others, the authors found that in general, a person's risk of dying prematurely from any cause plummeted by nearly 20% if he or she began to meet the current exercise guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate activity per week compared with someone who didn't exercise. If, however, someone almost tripled that minimum level, completing about 90 minutes of exercise 4 or 5 times a week, the researchers wrote, his or her risk of premature death dropped still further, but only by another 4%. He or she might, however, be well on the way to enviable fitness. That's important to bear in mind, especially for those, like me, who are fairly confident that we sit outside the bounds of mortality and don't need to obsess about premature death, but really, really want to trounce our spouses at the next community fun run. Any amount and type of exercise will probably improve your health somewhat, but it won't necessarily make you physically fitter or athletically more competitive. 30 minutes of walking 5 times a week is not going to lower your personal best time in a 5K. Walking 3 minutes at an extremely brisk pace, though, followed by 3 minutes of slower.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?